Hello and welcome to Seattle City Makers. I'm your host, Jon Scholes. Well, hope everybody's doing well out there. Hope you survived the mini heat wave we had in Seattle. I guess it wasn't that many. It was the longest stretch of above 90-degree days I think we've ever had in our history. But we made it, and we're back to the temps that we know and love as Seattleites, as Pacific Northwesterners. Highs in the 70s, lows in the 50s. That will do just fine for us. It seems like there's nothing we like to complain more about than above 90 hot summer days. So we got a lot of complaining out of our systems over the last couple of days, and it's good to have the more normal Seattle weather back here in the midsummer. So glad you're joining us for episode 15, where I sit down with the director of the city's Office of the Waterfront and Civic Projects, Marshall Foster, who has had his hand on the tiller, so to speak, of the remake of downtown's central waterfront over the last 8 years or so. He's held that role and really been the central figure through many mayors and city council members and other officials that have come and gone over that period while the city has designed and constructed this project, which is getting much closer to reality and opening here as we look ahead over the next couple of years. Prior to leading the city's Office of the Waterfront, Marshall was the city's planning director and served as the planning director in San Francisco as well between 2000 and 2005 before coming up to Seattle to take a job with Methuen, a great architecture firm based in Seattle but with offices in San Francisco as well. And so Marshall's had his hand both through his public sector roles and private sector roles in design and development of major infrastructure moves in our city and in others, and has truly been a city maker of sorts. So it was about time we got him on the program to talk about his efforts, and we really focus on his time in leading the city's Office of the Waterfront, and we dive deep into the Waterfront project. And if it's a project you're deeply familiar with or less familiar with, I think you'll find the conversation interesting. Marshall takes us behind the scenes, gives us sort of the current status and timeline, a picture of what's happening down there if you haven't been down on the waterfront. Plenty is happening, and Marshall gives us a good orientation to sort of where the project stands today. But we also look back over the many years that he has been in a leadership role and been keeping this thing moving through many mayors, as we discuss, and the politics around all of that, and keeping the project going through the pandemic. So hope you enjoy my conversation with Marshall Foster, the director of the Office of the Waterfront and Civic Projects for the City of Seattle. Well, it's good to finally have you on the show.
Yeah.
Because you're a city maker in your own right.
Really happy to be here.
When you look up city maker in the dictionary, your face is actually right next to the term city maker,
That's kind of scary.
Given all the city making that you've had your hand in, but we'll get to some of that. But how have you been generally?
I've been great. I mean, it's been an intense 6 months, right? The whole world's trying to figure out how to wake up and get back into downtowns, and we've been trying to find our balance. My little team here at the Waterfront is a fascinating little microcosm of the city family.
Yeah.
It's great to have people back in, to have some of the energy back. And my family is just, so excited to have finished a regular year of school and kind of getting back into normal life. And, everybody's out having a great summer. Took my oldest, who's 15 going on 16, to summer camp yesterday up in Sisters, Oregon.
Oh, yeah.
Which is fabulous. And
great part of the Northwest.
Yeah. We live over in West Seattle. And, it's just interesting. You just see things that you didn't see a few years ago, and it feels so good. Like we have they call it the Summerfest in West Seattle, which was just off the hook. Like you, my wife and I are big music fans. We love live music. We love getting out. We love hearing what we can. And it was just, they did an awesome job. There were a bunch of great bands, and it just warmed my heart. I was just so happy to see hundreds of people out.
Yeah, we need that.
Dancing the way Seattleites do, kind of, shoegazing or wiggling in place a little bit, kind of doing the Seattle thing.
The side-to-side sway thing or whatever
it
is.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we were just talking, you were in France for a bit. How did the cities there feel? What was life like on the streets of Paris and some of the other places you were?
Yeah, it was very interesting to just sit back and make space to watch people and how they were acting in cities. Very different is the short answer. I mean, very much like the way the world was pre-pandemic. It felt very natural to be in the cities. It felt very natural to be crowded. You didn't see masking, which was obviously a little concerning because the levels were still pretty high in France early in June. But it also was just nice to see people feeling comfortable on transit and in cities. The cafes were all full. The bikeways were full. Tourism was back. And as someone who spent, I don't know, a decent amount of time in Europe, it was nice to feel really welcome in France. Not that it haven't in the past, but you know how it can be.
Yeah.
People were so happy to see people visiting again, you know? And it was cool for my kids who were both teenagers learning French to be able to actually use the language and not feel awkward or like someone's rolling their eyes at you. Like people were really sweet, you know, even in Paris, which hasn't always been the case.
Yeah. No, I think we all feel that way. I'm just grateful. I certainly do, of all the people visiting Seattle. It's like, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming here. They still very much believe in our brand and what we have to offer, want to have a good time, and whether they've been here before or this is their first time, and they're helping a lot just bring the city back to life.
Yeah, I got to tell you, every time I go to the waterfront, especially on the weekends when we do some of our events, I'm always doing a double take at just how many people are down there. I mean, even with all of our construction, you know, it's not the easiest environment to, you know, find your way and all that stuff. People are out in masses. It's pretty impressive. I think people are just, you know, they're ready for normal life again. They want some of that energy back.
Yeah, so. and urban life for sure.
Totally.
So in addition to your city making, I know you're also a good citizen. My colleague relayed a story from a couple of months ago where you rescued her off of a stranded, stuck, broken down metro bus. I think you both live in West Seattle.
Yep.
And she said you rode up. I don't know how you knew she was on. This is the part of the story I don't know, so you're going to have to clarify this. But her bus breaks down, or maybe the lower bridge wasn't open or something. She couldn't get downtown on the bus.
Yeah.
And you ride up in your cargo bike or your e-bike and rescue her and take her to the West Seattle water taxi.
It was one of those spontaneous.
You were, a good citizen, like also I think a hero that morning.
That was pretty hilarious. Well,
how did you know she was on the bus? This is part of the story I never got.
So I literally biked up. If you've ever kind of approached the lower bridge, you know, it all these different lanes come together at one spot under the big West Seattle Bridge. And, you know, I pull up, everything's queued up, everybody's backed up. Like, you know, like if you've ever been in a situation where traffic is like stopped for hours, that vibe where everybody gets out of the car.
Quite a while over there.
It was that situation. So she had actually I think she had stepped off her bus.
Okay.
She was like on the curb.
Sense. Yes.
Like on her phone, like, oh, damn it, I got to tell Jon I'm going to be late for everything today.
Get in the office.
And I'm sitting there like trying to come up with my plan. And I'm like, oh, hey. Everyone is realizing the only way any of us are going to get to work is to hightail it. It's about 3/4 of a mile maybe to the water taxi from there. If we didn't, you know, that was the only thing to do. And so I was like, yeah, why don't you just hop on the back of my bike? I have this huge, it's called a long tail bike with a big seat on the back for whomever. So she just hopped on. We had a nice chat, caught up, and
it's good to have.
We barely made
lots of ways
taxi.
lots of options and ways to get around, right?
Yeah,
we need redundancy in the city.
I mean, West Seattleites now, if you want to find a bunch of creative, I think pretty resilient Seattleites, man, that's where you go. I mean, everybody over there is just like, oh yeah, great, that's down too. Whatever,
let's figure it out.
Let's kayak today. We'll get there somehow.
Well, good on you for being a wonderful Seattle citizen.
We caught up on some good gossip.
Yeah.
What's going on at DSA, all that sort of thing.
So you've had your hand in so many different major moves that the city's made and is making over your time here. And I was trying to think back to how many mayors that you've worked for. And it's a lot. I mean, I think it's at least 5. Maybe 6.
Depends. You know, we always chuckle about this math in the city because there's the Mayor Burgess's brief tenure and then Mayor Harrell's first round.
Yep.
So yeah, if you count those, I believe it's 6. I came in under Mayor Nichols in 2007 and then have worked basically in some capacity for the administrations that followed. And yeah, that's just been, let's just say that's been an interesting window into human nature, politics.
Yeah. What's been the secret of your success in working for a lot of very different mayors and on high profile projects? And usually, the administration changes and a lot of staff changes too, but
Sure.
you've held, not the same role, but similar roles through many administrations. What do you attribute your success to of being able to navigate different political waters?
It's an interesting question. The thing that I think about when you ask that is actually before I came to Seattle, I kind of trained in San Francisco, urban development and politics, and I got to work for a man down there. I actually started working for Willie Brown, who was the first mayor that I ever worked for, and then worked for the then Mayor Newsom, obviously now the governor. But I worked for a man named Dean Macris, who was the planning director of San Francisco, and he was truly an artist at urban development and how to think about what was the right thing to do from a planning perspective, the development dynamics, the economics of development, the community around development, and the political nexus between those. And frankly, I mentored with this man who just taught me an incredible amount. And then, frankly, coming into Mayor Nichols' administration kind of gives you a perspective. That was a very effective administration, and it did a lot of incredible things for Seattle, and it had a good organization for how to deliver on big ideas, whether it was the South Lake Union streetcar, some of the big park initiatives. And so, I think I was fortunate to walk in when I did and get a front row seat for how to be effective in this context. One of the things I really love about working in these roles in government in Seattle is this feels to me like a big city that's still a small town in some ways. Like there's a community, especially most of my work has been, around the downtown and its development and its infrastructure in some way. Different pieces we'll talk about, but finding that landscape and figuring out how to be effective in that landscape was sort of a really interesting and also manageable universe of understanding the players and how to be effective. I guess the thing about the different administrations for me has been not that hard because there's been so much longevity on the things that I have cared about and wanted to work on. So the waterfront, Mayor Nichols had this huge passion for this waterfront, and he had a huge passion for the history of it, and he kind of set the ball in motion. Yep. We got so much of the foundation of it in place, and the successive mayors have been very supportive, and there was so much legacy. There was
with
so
some
much,
exceptions, though, right?
With some exceptions.
Right? I mean, you had to work for a Mayor McGinn, who, no secret, he wasn't a fan of that project. It wasn't his number one priority. And setting aside his perspective on the transportation piece of that, whether it should be a tunnel or.
I mean, I would say that was his main.
But how did you sort of carry on in your work to shepherd this capital project that the mayor of the city didn't really want to see happen, or wasn't a huge priority of his? I
mean, honestly, to be fair to him, I would not say he didn't want to see the waterfront become a great park. He had a deep, deep philosophical disagreement around the tunnel. As you know. And so much of his energy went into that. There was a lot of collateral damage, if you will, in terms of the people associated with the waterfront, a lot of our philanthropy and the leadership on that side. There wasn't a lot of love lost, let's just say that. But I spent a lot of time with him, and actually a lot of the formative legislation that is responsible for where we are now on the waterfront, he actually took to council. So we kind of had a détente, the tunnel was the bitter pill that he was swallowing in order for us to be able to build the waterfront. But at the end of the day, honestly, I have to be fair to him, I don't think he was against the Great Waterfront. In fact, I remember when we had Great Cities, that organization and that whole
predated his
administration. A lot of early conversations took place at that venue about how to put together the pieces of all this. So, it's interesting. Everyone, there've been hard pieces to get through through every administration. Pieces like figuring out the Waterfront Local Improvement District, right?
Yep.
You had a front row seat for all of that, which took place across several administrations. That was a really interesting moment because it was such a frankly, Seattle had never done any kind of value capture strategy where you work in partnership to try to capture some of that value that the park creates. Lots of cities do. Seattle never at that scale. And so building the support, as through each administration to put the political capital into that took some work. But I guess the overarching thing that always kept it going was people really saw the power of the vision and found a reason that they should care deeply about it. One of the interesting things for me was when dealing with COVID with Mayor Durkin and being in the terribly hard day-to-day situation that her administration was in. I'm having to make these really just super difficult decisions about people's lives. And things were kind of dark. There wasn't a lot of light at the end of the tunnel, but she always kept, and I'm not just saying this to be nice, she always kept the waterfront as like one of the lights at the end of the tunnel. And she was like, she'd look at me and just be like, damn it, Marshall, that thing has to stay on schedule. You have to keep that drumbeat. I remember there was a moment where everybody was pushing for us, not only the city, but the state and the county to shut down construction sites in COVID because of the concerns. And she was really out front with us, like, we have to keep going. You have to keep the jobs, but ultimately we need projects that people can look forward to.
Some hope and
see things where the city's going to come back to life.
Yeah.
So I've honestly, I had never intended to get this focused on working for mayors, if you will, but I have just really come to enjoy it. And that's why I've stayed with it as long as I have, because I've just learned different things from everyone, from each one of them. There's been
and you've kind of been the through thread for this project through all those administrations and lots of other staff in many years, and now a pandemic.
I know.
What's the thumbnail status report that you'd give to the city residents on the Waterfront project? And it strikes me that we've been planning and building this so long that if you've been here throughout that whole time, maybe you've forgotten. And then because we've been building and planning and building this so long, you may have just arrived into to Seattle over the last couple of years as a resident, so you don't really know about it. So there's kind of an audience out there that either needs to hear about it fresh or needs a refresher on kind of what it is and where we're at.
Yeah. So, 20 acres of new parks and public space in the footprint of where the viaduct used to stand. I won't go through all the history, but we started this in 2009, and I always keep a track because my daughter was born right when we started, and she's now 13. So she wants me to get we're going to finish this thing when she's in high school. That's the plan.
Yeah.
So we are about 2.5 years into our construction. No, 3 years at this point. 3 years into our construction, and we have another 2.5 to go. So if you haven't been to the waterfront recently, we're building the anchor of the whole new waterfront is a major public promenade that connects all of our downtown neighborhoods from the stadiums all the way up to Pike Place Market, the aquarium. If you haven't been down, the promenade is under construction. We're actually literally today, it's kind of interesting, John, that you came over to do this today, because we are doing something we have been working toward for probably 2 years now, which is we're shifting all the traffic from the west side of Alaskan Way onto the new street this evening, which is a huge step because once the traffic moves over, we built the new street. The new street essentially from the stadiums all the way up to the market is now ready for operation. Yeah. So the traffic moves over and our contractor moves over to the water side.
Everything. Yeah.
And so now the contractor can really go full speed on building the promenade.
Move, I think, if you walk down there, probably really helps people finally visualize what this is going to be like. Because it's been hard to sort of sort out, because the cars are on the original street up until today, I guess, or tonight, right? And which is where the park's supposed to be. And then, well, that's
so if you want to take one last, ceremonial drive down the old Alaskan Way.
It's probably not going to have the same celebration as the viaduct closure.
No. Oh God, that was such a high water mark, man. That was a great moment.
Were you down that? Was it? It was like a Friday night, right? When the last
we were
car
all over
that drove on and then people are getting out of their cars. Were you?
I went out that night and drove it. I did I was back before everybody went out, unofficially the night before the big event.
Yeah.
And then, Saturday, Sunday, we had, I can't remember how many people, tens of thousands of people out on the viaduct, which was just like, that was a moment.
Yeah.
That was a city moment.
So less
less
momentous, but it's going to be pretty cool to see.
Oh, it's going to be great. And your point is exactly right. Like seeing what the new waterfront's going to feel like has been kind of a jumble until now because we've been doing all the utilities and the drainage and the boring stuff. Now you'll be able to really see it. Like the cars are out of the picture. They're over to the east, and you'll be able to kind of really get a sense of the new space. The other big thing that's happening and has been happening for the last year or so is the events down on Pier 62.
Yeah.
I just continue to be really happy with how well those are going. We're averaging thousands of people a weekend out on the pier, concerts, all free and open to the public. At this point, they have programming basically every day of the week, or close to, down on the pier. And that's just basically a taste of what the larger picture will be. So once the whole park is done, we'll have, all that free public programming happening throughout. And at the end of the day, that's really what's really, I think, going to be interesting about this in terms of city making is it's one thing to build a place or to build a public space, but then to step back and let that public life take it over and let it fill in the gaps. The things I love are seeing the ways people use the space that I would have never dreamed of. I would have never thought we'd have like a K-pop community who loves to do like where everybody comes in and basically, does their favorite K-pop band's routines. And now we host a whole day where people are doing that. And it's just phenomenal. The different communities that have found space. We do a Friday night event with KXP that we started a couple years ago, and it's growing, called Beats and Eats. And one of their DJs comes out. We have some food trucks. It's meant to be kind of low key, but it's turned into hundreds. And now I think we had like 1,000 people last weekend, and a group of roller skaters has taken it on. And they're like coming out. These are like the folks you see at Alki or other places like street skate, old school roller skates, not rollerblades. And it's their thing now. And they come out in mass, It's just very cool to see the way people make it their own, I guess.
And it's cool that because it's surrounded by a construction site right now, right? It's not that easy to get to.
It's not easy to get to at all.
It's so great to see the number of people that are taking part in the programming on the pier, and then just all the people that are walking the waterfront. And,
right.
It's the desire people have of just like looking at the great scenery and experiencing city life, and it's not even done yet.
Yeah.
We have all good indicators.
All very good indicators. Yeah, we're breaking ground later this year on the replacement of Waterfront Park, Pier 58 as we call it now, which is the one right between the aquarium and Miners Landing, which will be like another Pier 62, another major public plaza. And this fall, we're going to reopen the connection from Union Street. So if you've ever walked to the waterfront down from the Four Seasons Hotel and Seattle Art Museum, there used to be this really junky little blue staircase that you'd go down to the waterfront and it would dump you out in a parking lot. Now we have kind of a brand new pedestrian bridge that brings you down stairs and an elevator, which will open in the fall. So people just need to keep coming. And every time you come, you're going to kind of find a new piece. You're going to be like, oh, this is open now. Oh, that's cool. I can get from the market down to the waterfront. All these pieces are sort of falling into place. The big one, actually, I should mention, I'd be remiss not to, is the Overlook.
Yeah.
So the Overlook Walk.
Between the market and down below and the new aquarium to come. Yeah.
Exactly. And that actually has broken ground now. We're building the foundations, and that will really ramp up this fall into next year. So it's exciting times.
Yeah, it's been fun to watch it take shape. And I love being at the south end of it where so much is complete. And you really kind of get a flavor of what the rest, as you walk north, is going to look and feel like. And then that view from looking from the water toward the city of Pioneer Square. A view of that neighborhood that we haven't seen it for quite some time.
Exactly.
Haven't seen it since the viaduct went up, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, those are the views that actually like give me kind of goosebumps the most, or like walking down First Avenue. And, I remember I actually have this picture I use in presentations a lot of like, sitting at like Main or Washington and First, where you couldn't see the historic boat landing. There was an old boat landing right at the foot of Washington Street with the viaduct, and the viaduct goes down, and you just have this incredible water and this incredible piece of Seattle's history, which was completely separated from Pioneer Square. Literally, you could live in Pioneer Square and not even know it was there. So it's good to see.
When the project was being envisioned, I remember a lot of people saying, oh, this will be our Embarcadero, like in San Francisco, or our version of the Rose Kennedy Greenway in Boston. And as we've seen it develop, and you see the really high quality renderings that exist, and you all have, I think, updated those fairly recently to give people a picture of the finished product. I think those comparisons don't really work anymore. Do you agree with that? I mean, that the caliber of what we're doing here is, no offense to San Francisco and Boston, but just what we're doing here is so different and at a different scale, different quality. Yeah.
I think.
Do you agree? And is there a comparable waterfront in North America to what in 3 years we're going to have here in Seattle?
Yeah, I don't think they're good comparisons. The Embarcadero is really a roadway project with a nice sidewalk. We have, in the heart of the new waterfront, it's really a park. The scale of the green space versus the road is just fundamentally different than the Embarcadero. And the Rose Kennedy Greenway, I was actually talking to someone in Boston last week about the differences. The interesting thing about the Rose Kennedy is there's almost too much space. There's a huge green space in the middle separated by pretty significant roads and then historic neighborhoods in Boston. And they're having a hard time getting the neighborhoods to really take ownership of the Greenway. I think ours is much more intimate. It's much more closely tied. The city and the waterfront, the park is going to be really the connection, the connective tissue, restored between the city and the waterfront. It's going to be much more natural. The quality of the landscape design, I think, is a different level. I mean, I'm really excited to see the plants when they come in. What Corner has been able to do, and Corner actually is working in partnership with a local landscape architect named Richard Hartledge. And if you don't know Richard Hartledge, you should get to know him because he's a fascinating guy and he does exquisite garden design. And he has they've had this really kind of interesting partnership between the kind of big vision and theatricality and strong landscape urbanism of Corner with this kind of delicate Pacific Northwest knowledge that Richard's firm, they're called Landscape Morphology, brings to the table. And I just think when people go down there, it's going to be like an urban version of the Arboretum, like really interesting plantings, coming down in different seasons to see what it looks like in different seasons. It's going to have that richness. Like if you've been to the High Line in New York, it's acclaimed for its landscape design, right? The quality of the plant material itself. I think that's going to be very different than those other projects. And honestly, people ask me this question about like, what would our comparison be in North America? And I really can't give you a good one because it is so different. The thing that I think is that's mostly about, I mean, there's lots of places with great landscape designs and there's lots of, I think, really good waterfronts. I just think our waterfront is honestly way more interesting. A lot of waterfronts have died and become recreation spaces or they've become real estate developments in cities that have given up on their maritime industrial stuff. Seattle never did. It's a big, actually, kind of part of why my wife and I wanted to raise our kids here and not in San Francisco is the city still has this kind of industrial beating heart with the port and Coleman Dock and everybody coming and going. And I mean, we have our tourism on the piers and that's great. That's part of the mix, but it's not like Fisherman's Wharf. It's not like Boston Harbor Walk. Not that those are not good places, but ours is like a bustling, beating, energetic place. And it's got tourism and it's got people getting to and from, Kitsap. It's got the scale of the Port of Seattle with its kind of big shoulders and it's a little gritty.
And people
that's part of what makes it interesting.
Living down there too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of residential development along the water.
Yeah, tons. Yeah. I mean, that's a whole nother piece of it.
The mix is just,
it's really interesting.
It's part of the strength.
And it's been part of the challenge too. I think it's important not to sugarcoat this stuff. I mean, to make this working waterfront with all the port, maritime, everything work. We had to allow room for cars, room for freight, room for all those things on the waterfront. Those come with trade-offs. I think the core part of the project is extremely urban and extremely pedestrian friendly and people friendly, though. And I think people are going to enjoy going down to those pier parks and getting down there. It's going to kind of open a whole new chapter for why come downtown, why enjoy it once it's there.
Yeah, I think it's just going to be a huge home run. And I agree with you. I just don't think there is a comparison out there. And this mix of urban and beautiful nature. And I mean, there's great waterfront parks, like you said, around the country, around North America, Stanley Park, but that kind of mix of marrying the urban, the recreation, the natural beauty into one experience is, I think we've nailed it here. And it's around the corner.
Yeah.
What's been you've carried this project through the Great Recession, through now a pandemic, through a number of mayors, as we discussed. What was like the hairiest moment? The most difficult
that's an interesting one.
Challenging time where you just,
Yeah, we like to say that we're carrying around a lot of near-death experiences. It's part of what keeps our skins thick.
Yeah.
I would say that the hardest one for me, and I think a lot of us frankly try to block it out because it was a dark moment, was when Bertha got stuck.
Yeah.
That was an existential moment because our project really we couldn't do much of anything until that was resolved. And, there was actually a moment where the city almost paused the seawall ahead of the start of Bertha at the state's request. Unfortunately, we did not, because we would have been in twice as big a problem if we had waited on the seawall, but we went ahead. But, that required us to basically tread water for 2.5 years-ish.
Was it that long?
Yeah.
I was trying to remember, how long was that?
Yeah, for the repair. I mean, we kind of block it out a little bit, but that was, and everything that we dealt with, some of which we just was behind closed doors. I don't know how much of it was reported on, but there was a lot of challenges with helping WashDOT get that machine operating again.
Yeah.
That repair operation was unprecedented. You probably remember some of this, right? Like when they had to haul the face off
dig
of
the
Bertha,
gigantic shaft,
and they brought in, I can't remember the name of the firm, but they brought in, the Russian, I think it was a Russian firm, it was a European firm that
with the gigantic crane.
The gigantic crane, the last thing they had done was, pulled this enormous ship off the floor of the sea. Everything was unprecedented.
There's like one company you can call around the world to do this, right? And you hope they're available for you.
And you had just literally a army of engineers down there every day trying to figure out.
And lawyers, right?
And lawyers. Oh, yes, of course. A lot of lawyers.
Still going
on. I remember one day going down there when it was all still pretty fresh and just looking around the site and just spending time. We were just trying to understand what was going on. And there was like an army of engineers from Hitachi Zosen, which is the Japanese company that had built the machine.
Right? Yeah.
And, they were literally like just trying to figure out what they were doing. There was no plan yet. They were just understanding the problem. But we got through it. Nobody blinked.
And it got stuck just short of being under the viaduct, if I remember right.
Yeah.
And that would have been...
Oh, that would have been... Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was another kind of hold your breath moment for sure when we had to pass under the viaduct.
Yeah.
Yep. The other one that I remember, not that you need more than one, but there's one other I can't resist, is the Park My Viaduct initiative, if you remember that. And, having that whole back and forth process was pretty interesting. But it ended up actually being a mandate for the project. I can't remember the exact numbers. I want to say it lost by 88%, something like that. It was one of the largest.
The idea of keep it there and turn an unsafe, seismically vulnerable structure into a park, right?
Yeah. If you squint enough, and look at the viaduct, maybe it's beautiful the way the High Line is, but it just wasn't. It was a failing concrete structure. But the public's resounding rejection of that was a huge mandate for what we were doing. And, it kind of put some wind back in our sails at the time to help move the whole thing. It's good to be challenged. It's good to have people ask hard questions. It's also really helpful when you can come out of that successful with knowing people still support the project. Because we've had to kind of breathe life back into this several times to keep it moving. It's hard to keep. There's very few things, if you look back at the city's history, that have kind of kept where the idea has been able to sustain itself over more than a decade.
Yeah.
I mean, forward thrust and all those things obviously that was an example of that. But
and at every opportunity, the Seattle voter has spoken pretty loud and clear on this project.
Yeah. Seattle voters if there's one thing they love, well, parks and transit, other things too, but those are some of the things that always poll the highest. So yeah, we've been fortunate to have a lot of support to pull all these pieces together.
When it's done, how do you see yourself and your family using it? Where are you going first?
We use it actually a lot. We go down to Pier 62 all the time. We're big, I was going to say we're big bikers. I love kind of urban biking. I have an upright bike. I like to just tool around the city. I go down to Alki. What I see us doing is me dragging my teenage kids. Let's get on the bikes. Let's go down to the waterfront. My kids love the tourist aspects of the waterfront too. I brought my kids down. We did Wings Over Washington last week. My daughter had a friend in town, and it was so fun to just be like a tourist in our city, and do that. And they're screaming on the ride and all that stuff. So that's again, like one of the great things about it is you can do all kinds of different things. You can be a tourist for a day. You can go have an amazing dinner in one of the restaurants. You can go hear, what it's increasingly really interesting local music that you probably wouldn't hear somewhere else. It's actually really different. We have our nights with KEXP, but then we have other things where it's just really different. I think it's going to be part of my daily, maybe not daily, but weekly life once it's all built. And I hope obviously for thousands of other people too.
Yeah, you can't run out of things to do.
No, especially with all the people who've moved downtown. I mean, as you all know well at DSA, I mean, that is just such a hugely interesting story in Seattle is how we've been able to add so much downtown housing. And we really don't have a central park. We don't have a core downtown. We have some great downtown parks, but we don't have a central space. I mean, I say that, and of course, then I think of Seattle Center. That is that in a way. But with the proximity and the ease for daily life, people want a place to run. People want a place to walk their dog. I think it's going to add a huge layer for downtown living, just, making life better for downtown.
I'm super excited about what happens on the east side of the new street and all those buildings that have their back to the viaduct, sort of what goes into some of those spaces and nooks and crannies.
Yeah,
what's your sense of what kind of interests or activity are you seeing here and there from the private side, the folks who own those buildings to reposition them, bring in different tenants, sort of really turn themselves now toward a park and not away from a loud, noisy, dirty highway that was there for so long.
Yeah, I mean, almost to a building, we've had clear signals that they're moving in that direction. The key new developments like the Maritime building. I mean, it's interesting because we've had people make these large scale investments in the waterfront vision and redevelop, some of the buildings or build new, including great ground floor retail opportunities. Then we had the pandemic and we have this challenge with retail in the downtown. So I think you have people investing to tee it up, and then you have this challenge of like, oh wait, is our retail environment, is the market ready
turbulence.
For this yet? But then you have, I think the more we get some interesting creative retailing happening. Like I'm very excited about the new Citizen M hotel that just opened on Yesler and Alaskan Way, because it's got just the experience in that lobby and what they're doing with the retail. I've never seen anything like it in Seattle. And then we just got our first kind of corner store / grocery in the I'm forgetting the name, at University and Alaskan Way, the Cyrene.
Yeah, the apartment building there.
Yeah, that's very good to see because that's really neighborhood focused. It's a place to go grab breakfast or a sandwich or a bottle of wine before you go home on the evening. That's a good sign to me that this is like feeling like a neighborhood to people. And then projects are in different phases of sort of claiming that ground floor and reaching back out. But you see it almost, I say, pretty much on every block. One of the buildings is making those moves right now. If anything, I want to make sure there's room left for creative, for things to evolve over time too.
That it doesn't all get filled up.
Yeah.
And
like there's the
respond to one sort of moment in time.
Yeah, exactly. There's the Highway 99 Blues Club.
Yeah.
which is closed right now down on the north end. And God, it would be cool to have a venue on the waterfront.
Yeah.
Someplace that you could actually hear live music. And so I'm kind of holding out hope that we get something like that. And you have some great buildings, spaces along Western, which almost feels like people sometimes compare it to like Soho in New York, like those big, it's kind of like big warehouse spaces, which we had a lot of furniture showrooms, which aren't there anymore. So what could happen there?
I think that's going to be an exciting part of downtown that's kind of sometimes forgotten as we think about this big project and the impact it's going to have on adjacent neighborhoods like Pioneer Square. But
I hope we
Western
ultimately
Ave is
kind of have a
gonna be-
waterfront district down there from First Avenue sort of down to the piers, where they work as a district and start thinking about how to build the culture of it and the mix of retail and all that good stuff.
Whenever I'm talking about the waterfront, I always get the question of, are the concerts on the pier going to come back? And I think, obviously there's music down there that you referenced. People are thinking of the larger scale that One Reel and others ran. I think the answer is yes at some point if there's a promoter and a organizer. The space is there, right? I mean, the
space is there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not as big as it was, but the interesting
thing...
But the
new plaza you mentioned could be home to...
Totally.
Right, to that scale of event.
I mean, it's been interesting for me. We actually have several of the people who worked on those events doing our events now, like John Stone, who was with Run Reel, and others. And one thing I've been learning that they understand is how much that market for those events has changed. Like, people aren't as much looking for like, I'm going to buy a ticket to go sit in a chair and watch Jimmy Buffett with the sunset, right? Like, that was Summer Nights on the Pier, which was an experience. Now they're like, they kind of want a festival experience, is the way it's been described. Pop in and out. There's some great music. It's going to change up over the night. There's going to be really good food, and there's going to be, some good drink. Like, it's kind of more of a festival experience, a little bit more like if you've ever, if you go to I don't want to compare to the Capitol Hill block party, but, those kinds of events scaled down, where you get all those different things.
Self-guided.
fused together. Self-guided.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of more our angle.
Fits our attention span nowadays, I think, right?
Yeah, exactly. And people, I think that's in some ways a better fit. Like, the thing about the Summer Nights, those really big events. And I mean, we may do some of those. We could. But we also would close the pier.
Yeah.
It would be fenced and you had to have a ticket. Now you go to those things, they're free and open to the public. If you're not doing the music, just walk out on the float and enjoy the sunset. You don't have to pay for it. It's not closed to the public as a result. So that feels better to me. It feels like a good fit.
There's all kinds of predictions coming out of the pandemic on how, city life is going to change forever and how preferences and behaviors are now sort of fundamentally different, and the future of work and where people want to work and how people travel. What do you think stays the same? What do you think is going to be different for urban areas, for cities like a Seattle or a Vancouver or a Paris as we, continue to emerge from this pandemic and the impact it's had on our downtowns and urban areas?
Yeah, I'm really fascinated by this question, and I'm not going to pretend to have any particular insight on it, except just watching people, watching the city and my own team, and kind of where my sense of where the energy is going is that we are going to have sort of a different balance. I think anyone would say that's probably pretty obvious at this point, between work and traditional in-office, type of work. It's going to be more of a hybrid. The thing I'm really interested in is, like, and I'm sure you're aware of this, like, some of the numbers that are coming out about activity in downtowns is showing how much some of that might be okay. Like, we're bringing in more people for the experience side of downtowns, and that's not just tourism. That's also local people using the downtown to have a great Friday night, have a great night out, have a great experience of the waterfront that is not necessarily tied to work. And so it's a different kind of calculus I feel like we're going to have to find. That's an interesting question for me, like downtowns as places for cultural life, for entertainment. I think it just opens a lot of doors for how we think about the space, how we think about our transportation system. We're taking a lot of pressure off of the traditional focus on the peak period commute and everything. Most of our transportation system
gets out at 5.
Yeah, and we size our transportation system to deal with basically 6 hours out of the day during the workday. And so I think we're going to be able to be more creative about urban space, about streets and public spaces. The big question for me is what we're going to do with our, how the office environment is going to evolve, and how much of it are we going to need? And are there really creative ways to think about architecture and housing and a lot of the space we have in cities? Are there interesting ways to think about our ground floors? And, going past retail to think about cultural space and retail, blending and performance, to find new ways to animate all of our, our first 30 feet of all of our buildings, basically. I would love to, have a think and do tank kind of a thing with a DSA and some of the different organizations around town to just really start not only thinking about it, but also doing some experiments, with different ways to get people trying out different concepts in the city. It feels like such a rich time to be, trying that out. If there was a good thing for me that came out of the pandemic, is it sort of shook everyone out of their stasis, and we should also leverage the good side of that, which is to try some new things.
Yeah, we had some courage to do instead of just talk and do and then evaluate and see how it worked and adjust. And
we all had to think really differently. I'll never forget. I'll just tell you one funny story, personal one. In the early days of the pandemic, we all kind of had other duties as required, big time, right, at the city. Like everybody was just trying to figure out how to be helpful. And we didn't know how big the pandemic was going to be yet. This was like March still, 2020. Maybe, we were talking about field hospital was coming into Lumen. Yeah. We didn't understand how big the virus was going to get. And the assignment I got was, well, all those downtown hoteliers from your LID work, all the hotel owners.
Right.
We may need to be like quarantining people at scale. There's not a lot of downtown hotel occupancy. Yeah. Can you go work a negotiated agreement? Maybe we need a field hospital with like 1,000 beds. Can you call up the new Grand Hyatt? And so we were having those conversations with all those folks. That was fascinating because to the point we were talking about, like everything was up for grabs. It was the initial call would be like, "Are you crazy? We couldn't do that. No way. All these folks with COVID, that doesn't sound like our brand at all."
Yeah.
And then get a call back in a day or two.
Yeah.
We could talk about that. We should really, we should be not just from an economic perspective, but people realized that this was like we were all in. Like everybody had to think in totally new ways. And I just remember those were some interesting phone calls.
Because it was like recognition of a crisis at this scale requires public and private resources to address it and keep the community safe. And everybody's got a role to play and an obligation of sorts.
I was very proud to see how much people leaned in to find, I'm not just talking about the city people, I'm talking about like Lumen. I mean, they turned that field hospital idea around on a dime, we had to raise money for food to literally do feeding programs, calling up, the Lywickies with the arena who jumped in and helped, many thousands of other people. Seattleites, I thought, really stood up in a good way.
Yeah, the way we've come through it has really affirmed, I think,
definitely
our values as a city.
Definitely.
So we conclude every episode by asking, what is your perfect Saturday in Seattle, Marshall? What's your perfect Saturday
I love that question.
In the city.
That's a good one. I love to swim in the bay, actually, which I like on every Saturday I swim. No wetsuit, just me and a friend. We actually do it a couple times a week, so I think I would start the day in some very cold water because it just shakes everything out. If you ever want to come, John, if you ever want to,
how long are you out there swimming?
Not very long.
Yeah,
not very long at all.
50-something degrees.
Immediately followed by hot coffee, and then I'd probably be on my bike, like I said. I love biking. I call it the ring, the Bay Ring. Around here, I was downtown. Go up to the locks.
Yeah,
doing that
through Expedia.
Hopefully, I haul my teenagers along with me. Though I have to give them credit, they've been more. I think it's rubbing off a little. They're more and more game all the time.
They're on their own bikes. You're not actually hauling them.
Okay, yes, they're on their own bikes. Yeah. And then just I just love enjoying the city. Some days it's gardening and cooking. I'm really into my rediscovery this summer has been Julia Child.
Yeah.
Have you watched that documentary?
Not yet.
You should watch it.
Okay.
If you have any, it was so awesome. And my mom was a huge Julia Child fan.
Yeah.
So I got out the old Mastering the Art of French Cooking. So I've been cooking,
nice.
elaborate dinners on the weekend. I definitely work one of those in. And then, if I'm lucky, I would honestly, there'd be some good music to cap off the evening, which, is increasingly all that's coming back big time in Seattle right now. So.
Sounds like a great day.
Trying. It'd be full. I'd probably be exhausted. My wife would tell you I tend to try to do 3 or 4 things too many on a given Saturday.
Well, that ride through the bay will get even better here in a couple of years, at least that section on the central waterfront.
So it's definitely just keep your fingers crossed and keep coming back. It's going to all be there very soon.
Yeah, well, you made it through a Great Recession and a pandemic and the largest boring machine in the world getting stuck. I mean,
a not boring machine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to think of what else
never a dull moment.
And 5 or 6 mayors, whatever it was. So
yeah,
it's hard to think of what else could be thrown at this project. And you, as
we're going to do an exhibit at someday. Once this is all done, we've actually talked to Mohai about let us do something to kind of tell the story of this.
There's so many elements I forget, and I was around for some of it, not as close as you've been, but
well, then just throw in there the tunnel debate, right?
Yeah,
throw the tunnel debate in there.
Yeah, we had to go to the ballot and
go back.
A lot of chapters.
Basically, Nisqually is when it really starts.
Yeah, 2001, the earthquake. Yeah,
that's really
This will be a 24-year journey.
Right. That was the galvanizing moment.
By the time you cut the ribbon.
Yes.
Well, I look forward to being there with you and lots of other people. It's not too far away, 2025-ish.
Yep, 25 right? is when it'll
earlier part of 25?
Earlier, it'll probably be the mid part.
Mid part.
Yep.
Okay. Well.
Yeah, it's coming.
It's coming.
It's going to be exciting.
It's going to be phenomenal.
Yeah.
So thanks for the really critical role you've played and for taking time on our podcast today.
Yeah. No, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for making space to tell the story of the waterfront and everything else.
Yeah, it was great. It was great.
Yeah. And come on down. I want to see you on Saturday night at one of our events.
Yeah, I know.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Marshall Foster, and I'm so grateful, I think as we all are, for the steady hand that he's had on guiding this incredible project over many, many years, and something that millions of people from around the country and world and around our community are going to benefit from for years to come. I can't wait to see the ribbon cut on the remake of downtown's waterfront. And if you haven't been down there lately, highly recommend it. It's so fun just to see this space taking shape and all the activity. And you really get a feel for it now that the traffic has moved from the old roadway to the new roadway, from the west to the east side of Alaskan Way there. You really get a sense of the incredible amount of public space that is being created on Seattle's shores. So go check it out. I want to close out today with a recommendation on what you just can't miss in downtown Seattle. And my recommendation today for our show is Sam Remix is back. This is the incredible event that the Seattle Art Museum began putting together on a monthly basis back in 2007, and then they moved it to quarterly. Think of nightclub meets art museum. That's the best way to describe it if you haven't been. And the remix for Friday night, August 26th, will take place at Olympic Sculpture Park. So nightclub meets art museum, but outside on the incredible grounds with the incredible views and art installations at the Olympic Sculpture Park. Tickets go on sale today, August 1st. So go to seattleartmuseum.org to get your tickets to Sam Remix, 8 p.m. to midnight on Friday, August 26th. Go check it out. And congrats to Sam on getting that very popular program back up and running. It was a hit before the pandemic, and it's great to see him bring it back. Well, thanks again for joining us on Seattle City Makers, which is presented by the Downtown Seattle Association with support from James Cito and production by Spark Creative.